The difficulty with variations is often they come with costs. So the reason that there's conflict around them sometimes is because it's where there's an additional cost and not everybody wants to pay for the additional cost, and so therefore that's where the conflict arises. But that's why you need a good contract. There'll be two opinions. So you'll have the cost of the variation, and the cost of the variation is not always calculated the way it should be, and people don't like spending more money necessarily. So it all depends on the parties involved in the conversation. So I've had parties that are very, very happy to, all of a sudden they want to change something and they're happy to pay for it, and that's no problem, and that goes through easily. Some clients won't take responsibility or accountability for their changes, or there are variations for a reason because they haven't done what they're supposed to have done, they didn't get their design team in early enough, whatever it may be. And in a subcontractor or a contractor's perspective, that's not their fault, and therefore they should get paid extra. And sometimes you'll have an issue with a client doesn't want to pay that extra, but it's their fault that there is the extra, so therefore they should be accountable for it, and there's that option for it. There's often conflicts around value and variations because a lot of people don't know how to price them. So I've had a client that was a decorating contractor, and they came to me and they said, we've got this variation account, we've got a load of day works. And I was like, why are they on day works? They're on day works because the designer didn't like the colour. It was a colour they specified, but once they saw the colour, they didn't like it. I said, that's not day works. You've got a rate. Well, I didn't have, his response was, well, I didn't have a schedule of rates. It's not a bill of quantities. You have a contract sum is broken down, therefore you can a rate. Now, what people don't understand with variations is there is a method that you can follow in order to value them. And often a lot of subcontractors and contractors will have a look at what that variation has cost them and add a markup. That's not how a variation should work. It's not about that. If you've got a schedule of rates, if you don't have a schedule of rates, then yes, you can do that. But they'll always forget about adding overheads, prelims, additional time, and the delay that it's caused. Now, if there has been a change for whatever reason, whether it's something that was planned and a conscious choice by your employer, whether that be an end user, a business, a main contractor, another subcontractor, whatever, whoever your employer is, if there's been a change that they've asked for, so they want to change the colour, or they want to add something, or they want to change the type of material from wooden to marble or something like that, that's quite simple. When it's something that wasn't allowed for or they didn't expect, that becomes a little bit more difficult. But ultimately, the law is it's on the burden of the person applying for the money to prove it. However, if you can prove it, and you either look at your contract or statute or the Construction Act, then the client just doesn't want to pay it, then that's different. But that's when you sort of end up in disputes. We try to avoid that. But ultimately, if you can substantiate your case properly, and with variations, I always suggest people that they break it into detail or have a look and go back to or refer to the contract. So with the decorating example I was showing you, everyone had moved in, so all of the walls had been battered about with people moving in on different floors. So we had a look at the work, and also the colours that they had picked were so dark. It wasn't like they were white walls and they added a touch of colour. They were real deep blues, oranges, really bright colours. So actually the cost to redo these feature walls was exactly the same as the original cost. The only difference was the preparation work was slightly different. So instead of having to sand things down where they'd done dry lining or where the plastering had been done or whatever it may be, they were having to repair damage where there was dents out of the wall. So actually you needed additional coats because they had to do an extra white coat on it to get it back to white, to then paint the more pastel colours because they changed their mind the way that they wanted it. Now, that variation alone, it was a bigger project, but that variation alone, when I worked with my subcontractor, what they were going to claim on day works and expenses, I got them an additional £9,000 on that one variation alone. Now, I'm not saying every variation is like that, but ultimately there are going to be some variations where potentially they didn't have the right information, or there might be some items within their contract that they didn't price correctly. So for example, they may have charged £100 to paint a door, and actually each of those doors cost them £120, so they've lost £20 per door. Now, if you haven't priced your project correctly, then that's much more difficult. But ultimately, if you price variations properly, it's a bit of a catch-22, because to some extent, when you're pricing a job on a contract sum, it's a bit of a gamble. So you win some, you lose some. But what I try to do is make sure that you win the ones that you can win, and that will then substantiate the potential losses that you might have elsewhere, or the additional cost you didn't allow for or you didn't think about, but actually hasn't been a change or a variation, so you've got to swallow it. But that's how the contract is supposed to work, is you're supposed to get that same average. So you've got a £250,000 contract. There are risks involved in that, and there are some items, if you break that down into 100 items, there are some items you'll make money on, and there's some items you will lose money. And when it comes to variations, you need to have that same fairness or balance to be able to get the end result. But ultimately, the issues is either people don't know how to price variations properly, or they don't price them properly, or they don't substantiate their variations properly, and that's where the conflict comes. Ultimately, if you've got a strong case, you've got a breakdown of where it's come from, you're in line with the contract, because and you refer back to the contract, and the contract was a decent contract in the first place. Even if it isn't, you can still work around it. But if you've got the right guidance and how to apply for a variation, it's clear, it's understandable, and it's substantiated, then that makes things a lot easier. Because ultimately, when you're looking to pay money to someone, you want that to be substantiated. And a lot of people in construction don't understand that or see that perspective from another point of view. So if they're paying out money, they're expecting people to substantiate it. They don't always substantiate it in a way that the person that needs to pay the money is understanding. So it's about clarity and ensuring that you're breaking down exactly what you need to break down and charging what you're supposed to be charging. And the more you do that, and the clearer that you are, and the less chaotic things tend to be, the less conflict that you find.